WPP just announced it's no longer a holding company. They're a single, unified company now. And look, we've seen this movie before. The question isn't what they're calling themselves. The question is whether the agencies inside actually change how they work. Spoiler, well, that's the hard part. I'm Kurt Schmidt, and this is the Agency Brief. All right, well, let's get into the biggest story of the week. And again, it's WPP. And honestly, it's a big one. So WPP is the largest advertising holding company in the world, just announced a major strategic overhaul under its new CEO, Cindy Rose. AdExchanger reported on Thursday's earnings call where Rose laid out a plan to reposition WPP as a single integrated company rather than a collection of agency brands operating under a holdco umbrella. Marketing Dive covered it. Digiday covered it from multiple angles. Campaign India, Ad News, B&T, Media Post, everybody covered it. That alone tells you the industry is paying attention. So what is actually happening? Rose is merging agencies, cutting costs because profits are falling, and reorganizing the creative side of the business. WPP Creative, led by John Cook, is being framed as, and I'm paraphrasing here, not an agency, but an operating system. They say they won't sunset individual agency brands, but the structure underneath is consolidating. And the compensation model is shifting too. Digiday reported that WPP is betting its future on getting paid for outcomes rather than staffing invoices. And principal media buying is a big part of that turnaround. Now, let me give you my honest take on this. The instinct is right. The traditional holding company model where you acquire a bunch of agencies, keep them semi-independent, and extract margin from the middle, that model has been dying for a while. Clients don't want to pay for duplicated overhead. They don't want to navigate 4 different agency P&Ls within the same parent company. So Rose is reading the room correctly. But, and this is a big but, every holdco CEO for the past 15 years has announced some version of this. Remember when Publicis launched the Power of One? Remember when IPG spent years talking about open architecture? The press releases always sounded great. The integration is where it falls apart, because you're not just reorganizing boxes on an org chart. You're asking people who have built careers and identities around specific agency brands to suddenly play nice under one roof. You're asking creatives and strategists and media buyers who have different cultures, different processes, different comp structures to suddenly operate as one thing. That's a culture problem, not a strategy problem, and culture problems are way harder to fix. The outcome-based pricing piece is interesting though, and I think it's worth separating from the restructuring. If WPP genuinely moves towards getting paid based on results rather than hours and headcount, that would be a real shift. That's the direction the industry needs to go, but outcome-based pricing requires something most big organizations struggle with: accountability. You can't bill for outcomes if you can't measure them, and you can't measure them if the client relationship is fragmented across 6 internal teams that don't talk to each other. So the restructuring and pricing model are connected. One can't work without the other. For mid-size agency owners listening to this, here's what I pay attention to. When big holdcos restructure, it creates turbulence. Clients get nervous. Talent gets restless. Account teams get reshuffled. And that's your window, not to swoop in and poach, but to be the stable, opinionated alternative that a confused CMO might be looking for when their WPP team just got reorged for the 3rd time in 2 years. Positioning matters when the big guys are in transition, so pay attention. Now, the WPP story doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's a broader thread running through this week's news, and it's about AI and the gap between story and substance at the holding company level. Digiday published a piece with a headline that basically says it all. The agency holdcos have an AI story, but not an AI business model. And that's exactly right. Every earnings call, every investor presentation, every keynote from a holdco CEO includes a section about AI. They've got proprietary platforms. They've all got partnerships with big foundation model companies. They're all talking about how AI is transforming their capabilities. But clients aren't seeing it translate into better work or lower costs. Well, at least not yet. And this connects directly to another Digiday piece from this week about AI compute costs becoming a real and unpredictable cost center for agencies. The argument is that as AI moves from being a novelty to being embedded in day-to-day operations, someone has to pay for the compute. And right now, most agencies are absorbing that cost without a clear model for passing it through or pricing around it. This is genuinely a hard problem, and I want to be fair about that. Nobody has figured out the economics of an AI in professional services yet. But the holdcos in particular are in a tough spot because they've made big public promises to investors and clients, and now they need to deliver returns on those promises, while figuring out who pays for the infrastructure, and that's a squeeze. For smaller and mid-size agency, the math is actually simpler. You don't have investors expecting a specific AI revenue line. You can adopt AI tools incrementally and build AI into your workflows where it actually saves time, and price your services based on the value of the output, not the cost of the input. That's the advantage of being lean. You don't have to pretend you've figured it all out. You just have to be honest about what's working and move faster than the big guys. And right now, you can. All right, let's move through the rest of the brief for the week. Digiday also published a really thoughtful piece this week on the case for and against an agency subscription pricing model. The argument is that the real problem subscriptions solve isn't pricing, it's cost absorption. As AI scales inside agencies, the expenses are real, and the traditional hourly or project-based billing model doesn't account for them cleanly. A subscription or retainer model gives agencies a more predictable revenue base to offset those costs. Now, I've got mixed feelings on this. On one hand, I'm a big believer in recurring revenue for agencies. Retainers create stability. They let you plan. They let you reduce feast and famine cycles that kills so many shops. On the other hand, calling it a subscription doesn't magically solve the underlying problem, which is that most agencies are terrible at scoping. If you can't define what's in and what's out of a monthly engagement, you're just going to end up doing unlimited work for a flat fee, and that's not a subscription, that's a trap. The model only works if you've got the discipline to define deliverables, set boundaries, and have the uncomfortable conversation when a client wants more than what they're paying for, which, for a lot of agency founders, is the hardest conversation there is. Switching gears to media, B&T reported that WPP and Dentsu are pulling back from the trade desk OpenPath. For those not deep in the programmatic weeds, OpenPath was the trade desk's way of connecting more directly to publishers, cutting out some of the intermediate supply side platforms. And agencies, specifically big media agencies, are now weighing in on what that pullback means. This is one of those stories that sounds technical, but has real strategic implications. When major holding companies shift how they access programmatic inventory, it reshapes leverage in the supply chain. If you're a smaller agency running programmatic for clients, you want to pay attention to where big buyers are moving, because it affects pricing, it affects access, and it affects which platforms are going to invest in the features and support you actually need. I don't have a strong conviction on whether this specific move is right or wrong, but the programmatic supply chain is opaque enough that reasonable people can disagree. But the pattern of big agencies consolidating their buying paths and exerting more control over the supply chain is a trend worth keeping an eye on. And one more. AdExchanger covered Infillion's acquisition of Catalina, which is all about feeding commerce and shopper data into their DSP. A court filing also apparently revealed some details about where agencies are actually spending their clients' money, which is always illuminating. The bigger picture here is that commerce data is becoming a real differentiator in media buying. First-party shopper data, purchase intent signals, closed-loop measurement. These are just some of the things that justify media spend to CFOs, not CMOs. If you're running any kind of performance or media practice, the agencies that can connect media spend to the actual purchase behavior are going to win bigger and more budgets. And that's the direction things are moving. Okay, and here's your one thing for this week. I want you to look at your current pricing model and ask yourself one question. Does my pricing model account for the AI tools I'm already using? Not in some grand strategic way, just practically. Are you eating the cost of ChatGPT or Claude Code? Or Midjourney subscriptions or whatever you're running? Are those costs showing up anywhere in how you're pricing projects or retainers? If the answer is no, you're subsidizing your client's AI transformation out of your own margin. And that may be fine for now, but it's not sustainable. So this week, do me a favor and add up what you're actually spending on AI tools per month, divide it across your active clients, and figure out where it might belong in your pricing. It could be a line item, could be baked into your rates, but it shouldn't be invisible. All right, well, if this was useful, share it with an agency owner or business person that could use it. Subscribe wherever you listen and don't miss next week. And hey, leave a review. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week.